As a child growing up, I used to enjoy watching cartoons and TV shows that had a number of superheroes, from icons like Superman and Spider-Man and a host of others. I was always fascinated by the different powers and abilities that each one of them possessed. But one thing that I found very interesting was their backstory of how they acquired their superpowers. Because initially, many of them did not know how to use them to help others. But with time, patience, and practice, they were able to master those newfound skills and abilities and began saving lives all over the world. And as I look around, I can only imagine that many of you also had childhood superheroes and wish that you had superpowers and abilities as well. But as adults today, I'd like for you to imagine, what if you had the ability to read human emotions with great accuracy, while reducing or minimizing the risk of misjudging others based off our own opinions? And wouldn't it be great to be able to read someone's body language, to be able to help them get through tough times or personal crisis and get to a better state in life? Well, I'm here to let you know that each one of these things are possible. And I'd like to share with you some how to recognize tips that have helped me as a police officer and a polygraph examiner. Now, early in my career, I was a pretty decent communicator, but I wasn't a great communicator. But just like other superheroes, I knew that I wanted to help other people. So in order to do this, I had to get out of my comfort zone and start learning more about myself while also learning about others. And once I started investigating criminal cases, I realized that I had to step up my game. You see, I discovered that I had been missing small subtleties, such as micro-expressions and body language gestures and cues that were right in front of my face, but unfortunately, I wasn't picking up what others were laying down. But with time, patience, and practice, I was able to master these newfound skills and abilities. And because of this, I've been able to help a number of people get through some tough times and crises in their life on personal and professional levels. And so I'd like to share with you some of the ABCs of effective communication. These are active listening, body language, and congruency. Now, when we talk about communication, one of the first things we need to understand is communication is the act of imparting or exchanging ideas or information. Now, this can be verbal or nonverbal. Typically, we start with a messenger and a receiver. The messenger will send information to the receiver, and the receiver provides feedback to the messenger. And this will continue and go on and on and on throughout the conversation. This is very important to establish effective communication when meeting someone because it helps build trust and rapport. Active listening. Active listening is the verbal component of communication. And this helps us with the channels of how people think, learn, and communicate with each other. And they are auditory, visual, and kinesthetic or tactile. Now, our auditory learners typically think, learn, and communicate in terms that involve hearing. And they'll often speak in terms like, I hear you. Hey, listen to this. Or, that sounds good to me. Our visual learners will think, learn, and communicate in ways that involve seeing. And they'll often speak in terms like, I see what you're saying. Hey, picture this, or that looks good to me. And our last group, kinesthetic or tactile, these learners will typically think, learn, and communicate in ways that involve touching or feeling. They like to get hands-on and right into the thick of things. And often they will speak in terms like, something doesn't feel right, or let me hold it, or you need to get a grip. So for example, a package comes in the mail that requires assembly. Now the auditory learner will take that item out of the box, and they would prefer to have some type of audible instructions to accompany them. If that's not available, then they will maybe ask someone to help read those instructions out loud. And if that's not available, then they may read the instructions themselves and say it out loud so they can process what they hear. Our visual learner, they're going to look for pictures, illustrations, or diagrams to help them piece the items together. And if that's not available, then they'll read the instructions step by step so that they can process what they see. Now, on the other hand, the kinesthetic and tactile learner, they're going to take that item right out of the box, they're going to discard the instructions altogether, and they're going to go straight hands-on. And they're going to start to assemble that item unless they run into a snag. And if they run into a snag, then they'll go to one of the other learning channels. So you may be saying, well, I do each one of these. And while that may be true, we're typically stronger in one area and not as strong in some of the others. Now you may be asking yourself, well, how is this going to help me help anyone? Well, you see, when we understand how individuals think, learn, and communicate, we're better able to assign tasks in our homes, in schools, in the workplace, or even in everyday general society, because we learn to speak the same language. Because if it feels good to you, it feels good to me. If it sounds good to you, it sounds good to me. And if it looks good to you, then it looks good to me. So we continually continue to build rapport with others to show that we're understanding. Body language. Body language is the nonverbal component of communication. Now, contrary to popular belief, there is no one definitive body language, gesture, or cue that indicates deception. Some of you may have heard the classic saying, well, I've heard if a person crosses their arms, they're being deceptive. Well, that in itself is not absolutely true. As some of you may be viewing this presentation right now, you may be seated with your arms crossed simply because you're cold or chilly, or maybe that's just how you relax. So we have to look at everything in its overall context. For example, if I cross my arms and tilt my head as though I'm lending an ear, and I give an eyebrow flash and nod my head, it may show that I'm engaged or interested. But on the other hand, if I cross my arms and keep them in an uptight position and show a sign of anger and inhale deeply and keep my shoulders upright, it may show that I'm frustrated, irritated, uninterested, or being guarded. So we have to look at everything in its overall context. And when we talk about body language, microexpressions are a great tool to help us establish emotion. Now, for those of you who do not know, microexpressions are a brief, involuntary facial movement that usually lasts about a half a second or less, and they're based off the emotion felt at the time of their display. Now, for the past 50 plus years, scientists and researchers have studied these microexpressions, and they've determined that we all have 7 universal traits in common: happiness, sadness, anger, disgust, fear, surprise, and contempt. And because of time purposes, I'm only going to be able to share a handful of those with you. So as we look in the first diagram here, in the photo, you see we're focusing on the area here in between the eyebrows. As we look at the muscles, we see a furrowing in the eyebrows, which show a downward and an inward movement, which is indicative of anger. Now, this should not be confused with concentration, as concentration, number one, would last longer than a microexpression. And other than that, it would show sometimes a squinting of the eyes as the lower eyelids increase, and it would show more of an intent focus. Now, in the second photo, we see the exact opposite. Whereas in anger, we saw a down and an inward movement, we see an up and an inward movement here in the muscles just in between the eyebrows. And these are indicative of sadness. And often associated with sadness, as we see in the eyes, there's a softening of the eyes. And in our last photo, we're used to seeing the lips outside the mouth in a relaxed state. However, in this photo, we see that the lips are pulled inward, which we call lip tucking. And this lip tucking shows that some type of emotion is being repressed. That emotion is being held inside as some type of tension. And oftentimes we'll see this when someone is biting their tongue or holding their words back so that they don't say something that they'll regret later. And so I like to say, when the lips begin to hide, there's tension building inside. And in our last group of photos here, we see different sets of hands. And these hands appear to be self-soothing as they're massaging each other. Or you'll see people pull on their fingers or play with jewelry on their fingers as well. These are very strong signs of stress, nervousness, or anxiety. And often affiliated with this, the hands may begin to sweat. And this is why we'll see athletes such as baseball players, they'll pick up dirt off the ground and dry their hands. Or gymnasts, they'll use chalk to dry their hands before they perform. Or just everyday people in society, when they get nervous, we dry their hands on their pants. Congruency. Congruency is the ability to analyze the verbal and the nonverbal components of communication. And what we're looking for are matches and mismatches, because these help indicate truth and deception. So, for example, as we typically affiliate the word yes as something being positive and in the affirmative, the head normally moves up and down. And opposite of this, we affiliate the word no with something being negative or on the contrary. So if I say, hey, that shirt you're wearing, I really love it. It looks great on you. You have to ask yourself, are my verbal and nonverbal components matching or mismatching? Or when you ask someone how they're doing, and they display a sign of sadness briefly and say, I'm okay. You have to ask yourself, are they really okay, or are they just saying they're okay? Because sometimes we have to dig a little bit deeper. And so I would charge you to take your active listening skills and your body language skills and look for those matches and mismatches, because when you ask the right questions, you will get the right answers. And remember, when someone has something to say and they're willing to talk to you, they just want to be heard. It's just our job to listen to them. And so as I close, I'd like for you to imagine once again being able to help that person that's angry or nervous by helping them calm down and relax. Or maybe that person is going through sadness and depression by helping them get to a better state in life before it's potentially too late. And so I'd like to end with a quote from Jonathan Swift. Vision is the art of seeing what is invisible to others. In other words, start using your newfound skills and abilities. And if you're willing to take the time to learn and practice, then maybe we can all be superheroes to help build and improve relationships between others, one person, one step at a time. Thank you.